My name's Justin Honer, and I'm going to be interviewing on behalf of Penn State Lehigh Valley. Today's Tuesday, October 18th, and we're located at Penn State Lehigh Valley right now. What is your name?
My name's Tom Roney.
When were you born, Tom?
I was born 1947, November 6th, 1947.
Where were you born at?
In Buffalo, New York.
Oh, wow. Who were your parents?
My dad's name was Dale Roney, and he was actually a manufacturing engineer, worked at Westinghouse. And my mom's name was Kay, and she worked for the post office for a while and then was an accountant with a small firm just outside of Buffalo.
Okay. How did their occupations kind of affect your idea of the military growing up? Did that have any say on it, any change your opinion or anything?
No, not really. My dad, he would have been eligible in World War II, but he was working on a project that ultimately was involved with jet engines, and that came out at the very end of World War II. And so they wouldn't take him. His eyes were bad as well, but he didn't care about that. But he was working on this project, and they said, you need to stay on this project. So I never really had any exposure from him in that regard. So I didn't really think much about the military growing up.
Okay. Did you have any siblings growing up?
Yeah, I had an older sister, 2 years older, a sister 2 years younger, and my brother was 5 years younger.
Did any of them serve in the military
No.
at that time?
Nope.
What were you doing before you entered the service?
Immediately before.
Leading up to that.
Yeah, leading up to that. From high school, I went right off to college and had a student deferment from the draft. I registered for the draft when I was 18. I actually turned 18 when I was in college. Registered for the draft the way everybody was supposed to. And then I spent a year and a half in college. I had a great time, met some great people, good friends that I still have today. I didn't study a whole lot. And so after 3 semesters, the dean said, maybe you should rethink, maybe college isn't right for you. So I was out for 1 year, working in basically odd jobs for a year. And that was long enough for the Selective Service to say, we think you should serve some time in the military.
Okay. At the time when you were drafted, how did you feel about that when you first heard the news?
Combination of kind of anger and panic. The anger was that I think the day before I got my draft notice, I also got my paperwork to go back to college again. They'd accept me back in because it was January. And they said, hey, you can come back, which was great. And then like the next day I got my draft notice. So wasn't real happy about that. And I was not anxious to serve.
Yeah.
You know, if I was, I would have signed up.
Yeah.
And I didn't.
Absolutely,
So.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Did you end up, kind of being happy to do it after you went through training, or did you still kind of, did that idea, the notion kind of change at all during your time in training or anything like that?
It did from the perspective of if I'm going to be in this, I better do it right, particularly once I realized that I was headed for the infantry and most likely going to Vietnam. I better get this figured out because I don't want to be over there saying, well, what should I do now? How do I stay alive? I mean, that was my purpose.
Mm-hmm. Looking at it now, how do you feel about it now, the experience and everything?
You know, it's funny because I talked to my daughters about this and just talked to a lot of people from time to time. And it was an experience that it changed my life, no doubt. But as much as I'd like everybody to have that life-changing experience, I wouldn't want them to go through it the way I did. You know, I wish there was some other way that I could share that information and say, hey, go do this, you know, and join the Peace Corps, or Vista, or whatever. I don't know, but it changed my life, unfortunately. And I said I wouldn't wish it on anybody else at the end of the day.
Looking back, do you think there's any chance you might have enlisted anyways, maybe after you're done with college or anything like that?
Probably not. Some people, I serve with guys who they were there because, hey, it's wartime. This is what I want to do. You know? Mm-hmm. And there are others that said, if I had a choice, I'd be somewhere else right now. And I guess in a sense, the irony is that living in Buffalo, I literally could have walked into Canada from where I was living. I mean, I could have walked across the Peace Bridge and into Fort Erie, Ontario, and just said goodbye and never come back. And I had some friends that did that. So it was an option, but not one I ever seriously considered.
Right. Which branch did you end up serving in?
I was in the Army, got drafted. Almost all draftees ended up in the Army.
Did you have any say whatsoever? Could you choose a different branch, or did they just say
No,
you're going to the Army?
Yeah, you're going to the Army. Although the day that I actually left to go, there was a number, I want to say there must have been about 20 or 25 of us all going at the same time. And before we left, we were waiting in the federal building in Buffalo, and a guy from the Marines came in and took like the first 8, 10 guys in line and said, "You're now in the Marine Corps." And everybody was like, "Holy cow, I was glad that wasn't me." And they got drafted in the Marine Corps, so.
I can understand that. So.
Yeah, I was like, "Oh, this is not what I was asking for."
Pretty happy you escaped that, huh?
Yeah, the Army seemed like the better alternative at that point, yeah.
How was basic training for you, Army basic training? Do you have any specific memories or that kind of stayed with you since that time?
I was at Fort Dix, New Jersey. The first, I think, 5 or 6 days, it was, I think they call it the reception station. It's where you came in, got your hair cut, got uniforms, got shots, got all that stuff taken care of. What I remember is we had to take a fairly lengthy written examination, Armed Forces qualifying, and everybody took the same one. And I remember a couple days after that, I got called out with about 3 or 4 other guys. I call out a formation in the morning. It's like, uh-oh, what did I do? Because you never want to hear your name called specifically. You know, hey soldier, hey private is okay, but when they're calling you by name, uh-oh, now what's up? And so they had us go to this Quonset hut kind of office place and sit out in the front lobby. And then one at a time, they called us into this office. And there was 2 officers in there, and they said, based on the results of this exam, you qualify for officer candidate school. And let us tell you why it'd be a great idea, and so on and so forth. And so I'm kind of flattered and thinking about it. And I said, okay, so how long does that take? When you get drafted, it's 24 months. You're in and out in 2 years. Anything else, any enlistment's at least 3, and sometimes more. And so I said, well, how long does this take? And I think it was something like 3 years after you finished the training and got commissioned. And I said, well, I'm only in for 2 years now. If I can do it in 2, I'll sign up right now. And they said, no, it's got to be 3. I said, and then I really don't want to spend any more time than I have to. So I passed on that one. They said, all right, go have a seat. A couple minutes later, I got called into a different office. And there was a guy there, and he was a helicopter pilot. He said, you qualified for helicopter flight school. I said, this is crazy. You don't even know how I drive a car. You're going to give me like this $5 million helicopter? I just turned 20 years old. And I said, you're going to have me fly a helicopter? Really? Yeah, it's this great deal. And I said, no, that sounded kind of interesting, actually. How long does that take? Can I do it in 2 years or less? Now that was another one. It was like 3 years. And that training was pretty extensive, obviously. And it's like 3 or 4 years after that. I just don't want to. I want to get in and out as quickly as I can. Okay, thanks, and go have a seat. And then we were marched out the back door, back to where we started.
Yeah.
And off we went. So, as far as basic training, yeah, that was the thing that stuck out was, could have gone to OCS, could have gone to flight school and flown helicopters, but I chose time rather than duration and the job.
Do you remember any of your instructors, who they were?
Actually, I do remember the first sergeant, the great big guy, and his name was Roth. I still remember. And what struck me about him towards the end of, probably within the last week or 10 days of basic training, people started getting assignments for where they're going next. Now, some of the guys already knew because they had enlisted. So I'm going to radio school at Fort Monmouth, and I'm going to this one, that one. The rest of us who got drafted, we had no idea, so we were waiting for our name to be called. And it seemed like every night for about 4 or 5 nights in a row, when they turn us loose at night from formation, and he'd call out 4 or 5 names, and he'd say, okay, gentlemen, I want you to do a really good job when you go to Fort Polk, Louisiana, because when I get to Vietnam, you're probably going to be guarding me, and I want you to take real good care of me. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Oh, well, we know where we're going now. And then 4 or 5 guys would kind of trudge up there and get their orders, and the next night another 4 or 5, and so on. So that's how I remember, because he kept saying, well, I'll see you in Vietnam. I said, I hope not. Nothing personal, but nah, if I never see you again, I'll be okay.
Sounds about fair. Did they ever treat you any differently because you were a draftee, or the others, or did they treat you just the same as the others?
Pretty much the same. There are little, there's nuances. If you got drafted, your military ID number started with the letters US. And if you enlisted, it started with RA, which was regular Army. And so, you'd have to, every once in a while, US or RA, and you'd have to tell them which one you were. Generally, they didn't. I mean, we're pretty much all the same.
What was your job, and did you receive the full training you were supposed to get, or did they give you an abbreviated version of that?
Well, they claim it was the full one. I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana, not exactly an exotic capital of the world to go visit, and it was for infantry training, advanced infantry training. And specifically, I was trained on mortars, which are kind of fun, actually, a lot more fun than trudging around carrying a rifle. But we were trained on both, but I trained in mortars. Yeah, when I was done, I could do it. I could do the job the way I needed to. So I felt pretty good about that.
How did you adapt to the military lifestyle? PT, exercising, things like that. Barracks life, the wonderful chow hall that was offered on base with the most delicious food only. And kind of social life and inside the military. How did you adapt to those sorts of things?
The PT was okay. I played most sports, so that was okay. Everybody probably had to step up a bit, because it was pretty rigorous. That was okay. I do remember, though, the first time we took a PT test, and there was 4 or 5 different components to it. One of which was, I think it was a mile run. And when everything was done, they posted scores. And they posted my score, and I thought, what the heck? I was like way at the bottom of the list. That isn't right. There's something wrong here. And so I said, hey, went to our platoon sergeant. I said, something wrong. I know I did better than this. No, sorry. And I find out that they never posted my score from the mile run. Mm-hmm. So I only got credit for 4 instead of 5. Mm-hmm. Well, that's why I was at the bottom, towards the bottom of the list. I said, wait a minute. Well, next time you can make it up. So the next time I, got up to where I needed to be. So that was one of those, should have done okay. Barracks life, basic training, we were 8 to a room, not bunked, just single beds, 8 to a room. Got to know those guys pretty well. And then Fort Polk, that was just push them through. That was in February, March, April and May of 1968, and Tet of 1968 was the big Tet offensive. Mm-hmm. Lots of people were getting hurt, U.S. and both sides actually, and so they needed a lot of replacements. So that's what we were there for. Get trained as quick as you can. I think from the day I went into the Army to the day I landed in Vietnam was just about 5 months to the day. So total training time.
The mentality of war and the idea of serving in combat, how did that mentality change, as you were going through training and you knew you were getting sent there, and then you got there, and then as you got home?
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, I guess, but initially, basic training, you have no idea. You're just doing the PT and doing whatever you're told to do. Then you get orders, and in my case, where I went to Fort Polk, pretty good chance that I was going to end up in Vietnam in the infantry. Then the reality starts setting in, like, uh-oh, what did I get into here? And how do I get out of it if I could? Is there any way to get out of this whole thing? And if I can, I better pay attention. Some guys developed this great technique on the Army training movies that they ran at the time. It always opened up with this really hokey music. And then you had your movie about, whatever it was, and then it would close with the really hokey music at the end. Well, guys figured out, some of the guys are really good at this, as soon as the music died at the front, they'd fall asleep. And when I hear the music coming, they'd wake back up again. And so they got a little nap during the middle of the day. Now, whatever it was they were supposed to learn, well, I went right by them. So I'm glad, they weren't serving with me. But yeah, getting out of Fort Polk, then before we left there, you get your orders for your next assignment, and that's when we got, show up in Oakland Army Terminal in California for reassignment to the Republic of Vietnam, and you knew where you were going at that point. Then the reality was like, okay, now what do I do? I'm going to be home for 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks. Now what? What do I do in those 2.5 weeks? And should I be thinking about what if I don't come home? I mean, that's kind of grim, but that's a reality. And geez, you hate to think about it, but you really did need to, somewhere along the line, say, hey, just in case, can you take care of my pet hamster or worse, So.
Did they have you sign a will or do any of that kind of legal paperwork before you left out as part of their?
No, they didn't. We did. We could sign up for life insurance. They offer life insurance, so I don't think it was mandatory, but I mean, I signed up for it anyway.
Of course. So did any of you change your idea of war or your attitude towards it? Did that change at all after coming back?
The idea of what it was, before I went over there, I mean, I grew up, in the 50s, and we were doing nuclear bomb drills in grade school, hiding under your desk. Well, at the time, it seemed like the right idea, but today, why bother? And so we had that, plus we had, just images from World War I, World War II, and Korea that came right on the heels of each other. And so that was my impression of, what war is going to be like. And then when you actually get to Vietnam, it's just very, very different. You don't get off the airplane and run for cover. You land at an airport, and it's like, this is pretty hot over here, but so far so good. Nobody shot at me. Well, there's nobody there to shoot at you because you're in a city, and off you go, and they put you on a bus, and they take you to an army base, and then another one, and eventually you get out to where you realize, okay, this is where the war is going on, and I better start really paying attention now. So.
What was your primary duty station that you were actually assigned to? Or did you have one besides Vietnam, or were you assigned to duty station and then from there sent to Vietnam?
No, we went to Vietnam first, just unassigned, and then once I got there, they assigned me to a specific unit. I ended up at the 82nd Airborne Division, which is really funny because I never jumped out of an airplane in my life. And it was like, wait, there's a couple of us that were there, and they said, you're going to the 82nd Airborne. Wait, we don't have wings that say we jump. That's not us. Why are we doing this? No. Well, basically it was, we need people who have infantry. We need infantry soldiers. Doesn't matter if you jump or not, we just need infantry soldiers. And so off we went. So.
Did you go anywhere else besides Vietnam? Did you go to any neighboring countries or anything like that? Were you
Nope.
in any other offenses or initiatives?
No. My overseas, that was it for my overseas, was in country. I was in hospital for a while. I shouldn't say that. I was in hospital for a while. I did end up in Japan, but that was in the hospital and then back to Vietnam again. So.
What are some of your strongest memories from when you were deployed? Some of the things that...
Well, so the first one was, what's it going to be like when we get off the plane? Literally, when I walk down the steps. No idea. And that got resolved pretty quickly. And then you realize, all right, another 364 days and I can go home. I think getting out in actually assigned to a unit, it's the hierarchy in the military. So I went from the division to the brigade and, down to the battalion, down to the company level, down to the platoon level, down to the squad level. That was our smallest operating unit. And here's the 7 or 8 guys you're going to hopefully spend the next year with. Better get to know them. So that was another one. And beyond that, it was just trying to figure out, you're the new guy, and these guys have been together for a while. The group, the 82nd Airborne, the 3rd Brigade that went to Vietnam, they went in February, and this was in July by the time I caught up to them 1st of July. So they'd already been there for a while as a group operating. And you're a little bit awkward as the new guy, trying to fit in and figure out. And, you know, initially you're trying not to get anybody else hurt. And eventually you start figuring things out and you say, okay, now I know how I can really contribute. I think that was probably one of the big ones. And then just trying to figure out what's our mission here. You know, I knew what mine was to stay alive. That's all I wanted to do. You know, and if they told me, hey, we're going to assign you with these guys and you're going to walk around in the jungle for the next 364 days, as long as I don't run into anybody other than my own guys, I'll do it. Just sign me up. I just want to stay alive and go home. That was it. I didn't have any grand vision of winning a war. Never happened. I just wanted to stay alive, make sure the guys around me stayed alive. Let's all go home together and be happy. Not very patriotic necessarily, but reality.
Yeah, it is, yeah. I understand that. What sort of relationships did you end up building with some of those fellow servicemen, those guys that you served with that you came in a little late?
Yeah, eventually, I mean, you realize that if you're doing the best you can and doing your share, it's not a problem. At the time, we were like best of friends, but since I got home, I think I've only seen 2 of them, and it's been almost 50 years, and I haven't seen any of the other guys. We went our own way when we got back. But like I said, at the time, we were, when you're counting on the guys on either side to keep you alive, and they're counting on you to keep them alive, you get pretty tight pretty fast. So.
Did you have any one in particular that you were very close with during that time? You still keep in contact with today, or?
No, I lost contact. He and I went to basic training together, AIT together, ended up in that same unit, and eventually, I went off to the hospital for a while. When I came back, we eventually ended up in the same unit again because we'd both gone through training mortars. We were supposed to be in a mortar platoon. And so we ended up at the very end, but that was it. We went home and took off. Haven't seen him since.
Did you ever end up experiencing any combat while you were deployed? Did you ever end up meeting anyone aside from your troops?
Yeah, we did. We ran into the other guys a few times while we were there. I'm sure I know there are guys that I've talked to and that were much more in contact, had much more contact with the enemy than we ever did. Ours was sporadic. It seemed like we spent more time looking for them than we did actually finding them. And once again, that was okay with me. Even when you're out there by yourself and there's nobody around, you still have that constant worry. But in terms of, it might have been 4, 5, 6 times maybe in 6 months, the first 6 months we were there.
Is there any particular firefights that you had that hold a strong memory?
Yeah, there was one situation in particular, and it didn't last very long, but one of our guys got killed. And as it turns out, in the order of march for that day, our squad was at the very end of the line, so we were kind of rear guard, more or less. So we went up, they called us forward, because they were all engaged to get this guy and get his body out of there. That was not fun. It was obvious that he was dead and just kind of creepy. Had to be done. Not going to leave anybody behind. But carrying him out of there that one sticks.
How did you internalize the casualties and destruction that was going on around you at the time?
I don't know. You kind of, as much as you feel concerned because it's somebody you served with, there's part of you that says, thank God it wasn't me. It's very selfish, but that's reality. That's the way, it wasn't me. And then you start, after the fact, when the adrenaline calms down a little bit and you have an opportunity to stop and think about it, and then you start thinking about, gee, I wonder, I know he's got a family. I know he just got married. How are those people going to feel? And what would it be like if it happened to me? And, it'll eat at you for a while.
Did you end up pushing a lot of that away until later on, or did you end up kind of living through that at the time? Or?
I think everybody did both. Some did a better job of dealing with it at the moment, I mean, relatively speaking. And then others, they kind of saved it up, and that was when PTSD became common, if you will, or at least accepted and acknowledged. The guys that did save it up and just couldn't get rid of it, and it didn't go away. And there's guys, I know guys today that are, still have nightmares. That I just met a guy not long ago. He was in the Marines, and he was in a graves registration unit. And they basically, their job was after the firefights, they'd send them out in a helicopter, and they would take the bodies and do identification and bring them back to a mortuary. And, he said he did that for his whole time he was over there. And I'm thinking, there's no way I could have done that. I could not have done that. And he said, I haven't had a good night's sleep in 46 years. Whew, that's pretty, that's tough. That's really tough.
How did you manage the mental strain of everything? A lot of guys most everybody there would, the day you got there, I'll use the Army specifically, it was 12 months, 365 days. And because of the time change and crossing the date line, when you got there, I think you're in your 363rd day when you got there. And that's pretty much what kept people moving forward. They count the number of days left. I mean, I don't know a guy that I ever ran across in Vietnam who couldn't tell you exactly, 127 days and I'm home. Short timers, we call them short timers. And you have these kind of momentous days. Okay, I'm down to 299. I'm in the 200s. Hey, all right, And then you got into, down in the 100s. And then all of a sudden you got 99 days. And the phrase they used then was, I'm a double-digit midget, right? This is great. I'm a double-digit midget. And then, from there, are you sure? How short are you? That would be one of the common questions. Hey, how short are you? 96, 127. I'm so short I could sit on the edge of a dime and my feet would dangle. That's how short I am. They have all these expressions. And so that's what kept people moving forward and thinking about, one more day, one more day, one more day. And that number just kept going down and down and down. At any point during this, did the alarm become a natural thing to hear? Was there an alarm for like a firefight or IDF or anything?
No. Oh, I got you. No, there was nothing specific. The only, being a mortar platoon, is at night, if anybody was sleeping, the call, well, even during the day, the call would always go out as a fire mission. And that went out pretty loud. And when, if you were sleeping, you better be out there in about 10 seconds with at least some semblance of your brain functioning, because they're going to be shouting out orders, and everybody had a specific job, and you went about doing your job. I don't think of it much today. No, I don't think of it much today. I remember doing it, but.
Did you, obviously, you had to learn to take really quick action. Did it ever become kind of like to the point of nuisance, like it was going off all the time, and then kind of got to the point like, oh, I gotta get up and I gotta go out there? Or is it, one of those kind of things where it just no matter how tired or how asleep you were, you just woke up and you were in it?
I view, to me, it was a challenge, particularly in the mortar platoon, where we would get these calls and for a fire mission, because we never knew what direction you're going to be shooting. We're shooting at something that might be 2, 3, or 4 miles away. And so you never knew. To me, it was always a challenge to say, okay, I'm going to get out there and I'm going to pick that thing up and I'm going to put it down within 5 degrees of where it needs to be without using a sight or anything, just because I know what I'm doing. And we used to practice all the time on this. And they'd call out, the direction is, using a compass, direction is 112 degrees, and okay, good. And you'd pick it up and drop it down, and they'd check, oh man, I'm pretty close on that one. And we used to train the new guys the same thing, that, worst came to worst, you could get pretty close without even looking in. So that was, jump up and go, and okay, what's up next?
So was your primary responsibility always to carry the mortar around, to drop mortar rounds, or was your primary responsibility a lot more of the time more patrolling or kind of just having it prepared at any moment? What was the primary duty behind all that?
The first primary duties during the first 4 or 5 months, I was assigned to an infantry company. So we were out on patrol. We'd come back in a base camp for 2 or 3 or 4 days and clean up and resupply and go back out again. And then when I got out of the hospital and came back, I got reassigned to the mortar platoon. That was more in a base camp where we were in a fixed position. And I think we only went out once or twice did we go forward where we actually had to take the gear and move it. We only did that, I think, once or twice, 4 or 5 days at a time. And then back to the base camp again.
How did you stay in touch with your family, if you were able to at all? Did you?
Oh, write letters all the time. There was no postage. You didn't have to pay postage. And so, I mean, you could literally take the back of, or the side of a sea ration box, little cardboard. You could tear that off and just, you draw a little stamp in the corner, put your name on there, in country free, and then write in like a postcard. So as long as you have something to write on and something to write with, it was baggies at the time. They didn't call them Ziplocs, but baggies, plastic bags, the greatest invention in the world for GIs out in the field because you keep things dry. So you put all that stuff in, you always had it in one pocket or the other, or maybe in your rucksack, but you always had a way to write a letter. And so you wrote to whomever you thought would write back to you. Family generally would. So.
How often would you write home?
Probably every other day anyway, sometimes every day. It depends on what you're doing and where you were and how much time you had. And if you had 2 hours where you knew you were just waiting to go out on patrol, then you could just grab something, write a little note, and leave it with the guys there, and it would go to the mail room and off back to the U.S.
How important were those letters from home for you?
Critical. Everybody, between the letters themselves and little care packages, we call them care packages that people would send us. I mean, those were like, somebody would get a care package. And they used to get them out to the field to us, too, when we were in the field. They'd bring that stuff out. A guy'd come off with his mail sack. And I never really thought about it much, but not too long ago I was at this function, and we had a table set up, veterans table set up. And I was talking with a guy, and he said he was a mailman in the Army. I said, oh, wait. He said, yeah, I was the postman for this unit. Well, yeah, okay, come to think of it, we did get mail there. I guess you would have to have a mailman, a postman, Never thought of being a postman, and I might have enlisted for being a mailman, but never thought of that until it's like 2 months ago that I talked to this guy. And so they would get the mail out to you. And when those care packages would come, everybody in your squad was like, what do we get? What do we get? It was shared stuff, Well, I'm keeping this, but you guys can have some of that. Here's some cookies, and oh, did Grandma send more cookies? We all go running over. All right, way to go, cookies. It was the highlight of the day.
I understand that. While not on post, did you have time for recreation?
In country?
In country.
One day we went to the beach. That was kind of cool. We were out for, I don't want to patrol for like a month. I don't think we ever saw anything, but we were out. And so our reward was they sent us to the beach for the day. It was a beautiful beach too, and served up, I think we cooked steaks, or they cooked steaks on a grill for us, and some beer that was actually cold. And that was, I think in the time I was there, I think it was it. That's about it for the R&R. I mean, you could throw baseballs around on, that kind of stuff. Base camp, if you had stuff, you could throw a football around or throw a baseball around. But that was about it.
Was there often much time to do that, to kind of throw the ball around through?
You could, yeah. When I was in a mortar platoon in a base camp, where we were fixed, we weren't walking every day. We got our work done, we train every day, we clean everything up, everything was ready to go. So you might have a couple hours where, well, we can go clean again, or, let's throw the ball around for 15 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever.
Where were you when the war ended? Were you already back home, or?
Yeah, I came home in June of 1969, and then the U.S. involvement ran for 4 more years until 1973, and then the ultimate fall of Saigon, if you will, was in April of '75. So I was already home. In fact, I remember I went back to, I got out of the Army on a Friday, and I started back to college on Monday. because it was January when I had that problem when I got drafted, right? When I did the other direction, I got out on Friday, started back to class on Monday because I really wanted to go to school. And then I transferred back up to a different school up north. And I remember sitting in the student union when they were drawing the ping pong balls for the lottery, for the draft lottery. I remember sitting there and thinking, God, I feel sorry for these people. You know what? I don't have to worry about this because they aren't going to draft me again. And they're pulling the numbers out and, oh, what's your birthday? What's your number? What's your number? I have no idea. It didn't matter to me what my number was, but I felt bad for the guys who, number 1 through number probably about 150 or 160, I would guess. They all got drafted. So.
Do you remember the day that it happened? Do you remember what you were doing that day or anything?
On ping pong ball day, or the day the war ended?
The day the war ended.
So that 1973, I was finally finishing up my undergraduate degree, and I remember seeing the helicopters lifting the people off the roof of the American Embassy. It was the big news at the time, and thinking that I hope all the GIs actually got out of there. They should be out of there by now, other than the guys that were the Marines that were guarding the embassy at the time. Hopefully everybody got home, and a part of me I think was thinking I probably would not want to be the last guy to get killed in Vietnam. That somebody had to be, obviously, but I wouldn't want to be that guy. That would be a real bummer.
Do you remember how you returned home? Did you they fly you back in a large military aircraft, or?
No, actually, going over and coming back was on commercial, chartered commercial. And there's 2 or 3 charter lines at the time that were flying, and they had flight attendants and civilian crews and so on. So going into landing in country, it was kind of quiet on the plane, and then surprisingly, going home, there was a lot of buzz, and then the plane, as it taxied, it got dead silent on the plane. It was kind of creepy, but nobody was saying a word. And we taxied and off we go, and the pilot came on and said, gentlemen, you've just left Vietnam. Boom, man, the place exploded. All 200 or however many there were on the plane, they're yelling and screaming, and we're passing around bottles and drinking, and I'm done, I'm out, I'm going home. Holy cow, this feels so good. But it was funny because preceding that, man, you could have heard a pin drop in that plane. Please don't let anything happen to us. We're almost out of here, yay. I don't even remember, I think we made 2 or 3 stops on the way back to California. Who cares? Make 10, I don't care. It all counts towards my time, so I don't care how long it takes me to get back there because I know I'm going home, yay.
How were you received by your family and the community when you got home?
It was, I was happy to see him because I left out of San Francisco on a commercial flight back to Buffalo. It probably changed in Chicago or someplace. I don't really remember, but I do know that when I got on the plane, then I was sitting in a bulkhead seat, so I had plenty of room. And there was an older woman sitting next to me, and she was striking up a conversation. I pretty much just wanted to sleep. And she struck up this conversation, we're proud of you and so on. I said, well, cool, this is, because I'm hearing that people are, cursing the guys out and spitting on them and so on. I think, man, I didn't have any of that, thank God. And she was very nice, but she was an antique collector. And she had this big, like a catalog with her. And she said, now where do you live again? And I said, in Buffalo. And she was going through her book telling me, oh, here's a lovely show here. And, it's like, yeah, okay, oh, yeah, that's really what I want to hear on my way home. But it was nice. She didn't spit on me. That was nice.
Did that make it a lot easier to adjust them when you getting home and with their warm welcome?
Yeah. I like I said, I didn't experience what some guys did. I was very fortunate, I guess, and get home and put your uniform away and live in civilian clothes again for a while. And I remember going out to dinner with my significant other and her mom, and a friend of hers was at where we went, and they knew the owner of the restaurant who was buying us drinks, and it was, hey, all right, this is okay. I like this idea.
Um, how did you end up readjust? How did you readjust to civilian life? Was that an easy process? Was that a little difficult readjusting?
It was a little bit tough. Like I said, I got out on Friday, started right back to college on Monday. So I had a focus point, I got to study. Because I knew I was not going to do what I did the first time I went to college. I need to get serious about this and focus. So that part of it really helped. The downside was that now I was 22, 21. I guess I was 21, 22 maybe. And had been through the war. And now I'm sitting in class with 17-year-olds who, I'm only like 5 years older, but I was like 100 years older in experience. And so that was a bit of a struggle, was trying to be like a normal person in college when you're really just so much different. And you don't want to be different. You want to kind of, blend in. And that was a bit of a struggle.
Do you think you've since fully readjusted to civilian life? Or at all?
Yeah. What really helped, well, of course, at some point I finally said, I should probably get some professional help just to deal with some of these things to make sure I'm not slowly going out somewhere I don't want to go. And so I did that, and then I joined the Vietnam Veterans Group. And that was great because we got to talk, at the time people still weren't talking a whole lot about the Vietnam War. It wasn't real popular. But we could talk amongst ourselves, and they understood. And so now doing more and more of that outreach work, even to younger vets. And then, as I mentioned once before, was that, so I volunteer with Habitat for Humanity. And I've been back to Vietnam twice now with Habitat, building houses, and both times with other Vietnam vets.
Do you think everything will it'll ever be the same again? How life was before you were drafted?
No, but that's life. It has to move forward. Mine moved in ways I didn't anticipate. When I was graduating from high school, I'm trying to think of, I knew one guy who had been in the military and went to Vietnam. And that was in 1965, which is still fairly early in the war. But we knew one guy. And well, I didn't think he was wired up right anyway. So I'm thinking, oh, he's probably not representative of what the military is like. And so I never really gave it much thought. And then 3 years later, I'm going over there. It's like, whoa, okay. So I don't think I'll never go back to the way I was, unfortunately. I'll never go back to the way I was when I was in high school.
Well, you said earlier you're a member of some veteran organizations. Which ones are you a member of?
Vietnam Veterans of America. There's Lehigh Valley Chapter 415 here in the Lehigh Valley, and I belong to VFW, although I don't actively participate, but I belong. And then through Habitat, I'm involved with the Veterans Build program through Habitat for Humanity. That's been, that's really been rewarding.
What have you done since separation? Jobs, organizations, or education?
Well, I got out of the Army on a Friday, back to college on Monday at a junior college in Texas, which is what my last duty assignment was in Texas. And so I started back right away, and then ended up transferring back to the school I started in Buffalo, and pretty much went straight through, finished my bachelor's degree, and then went on to a program to get my master's in education. And that involved, I was actually in a program that we were supposed to go to the Peace Corps at the end of that program, to Afghanistan at the time, which was after a lot of the initial issues in Afghanistan, but before everything hit the fan over there with the Russians and then ultimately with the U.S. And then we got caught up in some snafu political issue with, my wife and I were dating at the time, and we wanted to postpone leaving for Afghanistan for a couple of months because we were going to get married that summer. And they wanted us to go with the rest of our program. We said, we just want, we need like 2 months to finish this up. And they wouldn't agree to that. So we sent notes into the Peace Corps people that said, here's who we are and what we're doing. We'd still like to go to the Peace Corps. We just need to go a little bit later. And then they sent us back a rather direct message that said, no openings for people in your skill area right now. Okay, we taught English as a second language. Okay, this doesn't sound right, but fine, we'll deal with that. So it went into public education, and then from there went into private sector, and was doing adult education, leadership and management development, and I did that for 40 years. Actually, I'm still doing it part-time on a contract basis. So, and my wife stayed in public education and then ultimately in higher ed, teaching at a couple of universities, and she stayed in that area.
How do you think that your wartime experience has affected how you are now?
Well, it's funny because there's still some things. My middle daughter she quotes this every once in a while. It's funny because she said, well, it's something my dad taught me when I was about 12 or 13, and that was pick the hill you want to die on. It's one of the things we learned in the Army. Pick the hill you want to die on. In other words, hey, if this is a losing situation and there's, and you're all going to get killed, then why would you do that? That's not the hill you want to die on. We'll come back to fight another day. And so when she was pretty rebellious as a teenager, I put it politely, so I said, Casey, look, you need to pick the hill you want to die on. If this is the one, if you're convinced that you need to go to this party on Friday, otherwise the world's going to end, that's fine. Just pick the hill you want to die on. And today, and she's an attorney now, and very reputable firm, and she tells people all the time, my dad taught me a long time ago, pick the hill you want to die on. You know what? This one isn't it. And so that's one of those things that's always stuck with me. And I use that in the management training programs that I would run. I've used that a lot of times to explain to people that you're in this management situation, as a leadership situation. You really want to dig your heels in that deeply? Is this the hill you want to die on? And people are like, what do you mean? Think about it. Is this the hill you want to die on? You want to enforce this rule with this person? Is that really the hill you want to die? And they're, okay, you're right. Let me think about that. And then, they may back off, or they may say, no, we're going full speed ahead. Okay, just wanted to warn you about that. And that's, one of those things that's always stuck with me. The other thing that I learned being in the infantry, one of the things we learned, which was absolutely counterintuitive to me, but that is you always move towards the sound of the gunfire. Now, that's counterintuitive to me. It's like, no, that means they're shooting, I'm getting closer. Well, the end of the day, you can't do anything. You can't take out the enemy unless you know where he is. And the only way you're going to do that is move towards the sound of the gunfire. So, after the first time I heard this, it was like, no way. And then it was like, oh, wait, that does make sense, doesn't it? Because otherwise, I don't know what I'm shooting at. And in the business world, it's the same thing. And leadership development stuff is I would, keep the same, move towards the sound of the gunfire, whatever that is. If the issue in business was we have high turnover in our building, then don't run the other way and pretend it's not there. Figure out what it is. You got to go. You have to identify it before you can fix it. And so those are two things that kind of have stayed with me forever. Forever.
How has your service impacted your feelings towards the military and towards war in general?
Boy, I'll tell you, I don't envy anybody going in the military. I didn't want to do it. I went because it was my obligation, and I felt that much of a commitment to my country, I guess, that I would do it. People that enlist, I admire them. I mean, thank God for people like that, because we don't have a draft today. And so thank God for people that say, hey, I'm going to go serve for whatever their reasons. They're over there, they're serving. They're in some foreign base, they're on a ship somewhere. Good for them. I mean, I really appreciate what they do, and I think they deserve an awful lot of support. We just, the habitat bill that I just completed recently in Vietnam, we had a Gulf War veteran in our group. We had a woman who was in Iraq and Afghanistan. Thank God for them. I really appreciate what they've done. And when we sit down and talk about it, we all shared the same experiences. It's just a different time and place, but we all pretty much shared the same experiences. We all pretty much felt the same way when we were done. So, hooray for them. interesting dynamic going on now with the Vietnam veterans who feel like we were ignored for many, many years. That's what brought the groups together, Vietnam veterans groups together so tightly. You know, there were places where the VFW, if you were a Vietnam vet, they wouldn't let you in. That wasn't a real war. Okay, people really died, but. So now you got younger vets, and there's still a bunch of Vietnam vets that are not willing to reach out to the younger vets and say, come on, we've been through the same thing you have, just a different time and place. And so that's kind of bugging me, and I'm pushing for all I can that, hey, we need to talk and include other veterans of other conflicts. Veterans are veterans. Let's share that you know, what we've been through.
What message would you like to leave for future generations, both veterans and civilians?
Funny, because we were just having this conversation last night, as a matter of fact, at a veterans meeting that I was at, about what's our legacy, and you know, what do we want to leave behind as a group, as a Vietnam veterans group? What do we want to leave behind? And so, and what that's, I guess that's pushing me certainly, to think about how can I put together some kind of a program that I could take out to middle schools, to high schools, even to colleges, and say, hey, look, from somebody who's been there, here's a little background on Vietnam, the country, here's background on the conflict, the political implications of what went on in there, and then the end result. If you don't recognize history, you're doomed to repeat it. And I think that's how I think we should really be putting our legacy out there is, you know, we went through this, and try to not to be bitter and, you know, I didn't want to go and it was a stupid war or whatever it might be. But let's really talk broader based issues about, if you're 10th grade right now, well, so what, Vietnam? I mean, that was like ancient history. Yeah, but once again, if you ignore it, you're doomed to repeat it. And do you really want to do that? So that's where I think going forward, what I think we all, in my generation, I think that's what we need to be doing.
I know this is kind of a tricky question sometimes, but all things considered, are you glad you served, looking back?
Yeah, at the end of the day, yeah. Hated every moment of it. Well, there's a few times, like when we went to the beach, that was really fun. But generally speaking, you know, I didn't want to be in the military. I didn't volunteer to be in the military. I went because I felt obligated to do it. But my life was changed in ways that, you know, I don't know what it would have been like had I not gone in the military. Who knows? I mean, it gave me a sense of purpose, a sense of direction, right back to college. I knew I didn't want to be in the military all my life as a career. So, you know, I'm going to find a career that I really want and do it. And I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. So yeah, it gave me some life skills that hard-earned life skills, but ones that served me well.
Would you have done anything differently if you could have gone back? Is there?
I might have gone with the helicopter guys. When they offered me the chance to go fly helicopters, the more I think about it, in fact, one of the folks that was on my recent Habitat build, he was a helicopter pilot, and you know, and just talking to him about experiences he had, I'm thinking that would have been really cool, and you know, maybe I should have done that. They, you know, I believe there was a little over 2,000 helicopter pilots that died in Vietnam, which is a lot, but I don't know, there are days when I think that might have been fun.